make history, yet not under the conditions of our choosing. President of archaeological indifference, Vice President of truth, Secretary of statistics, Minister of celebrity injustice, Chief of staff and servant, of the great book of misdeeds, noble estimations, Bishop of the Great Climate War, Minister of the deteriorating sky, Baron of epic boredom and self-indulgence, all gathered notables. Whereas, breakbeats have been the missing link conducting the human spirit to this human form. We do hereby declare reality unchecked by the changing standards of dialogue. Statements such as keep it real, especially when punctuating or anticipating modes of ultra-violence, inflicted psychologically or physically, will henceforth be seen as retroactive and not representative of the individually determined is. Furthermore, as determined by the collective consciousness of this state of being, and the lesson disintuting thought patterns and their secular manifestations, the role of men as listening receptacles is to be increased by number no less than 70% of the current enlisted as vocal aggressors. Motherfuckers better realize, now is the time to self-actualize. We have found evidence that hip-hop sang at 85 RPM and increased by number of these activated its standard, a decreased quarters of its speed, may be a determining factor in heightening consciousness. Studies show that when a given norm is changed in the face of the unchanging, the remaining contradictions will parallel the truth. Equate rhyme as reason, sun with season. Our cyclical relationship phenomenon has encouraged scholars who raise a series of periods, thus symbolizing the non-linear character of cause and effect. Reject mediocrity. Your current frequencies of understanding outweigh that kind of things you don't understand. The current stands the equivalent of an instructed to the diet of an infant, the rapidly changing body with acquired dysfunction and formative symptoms, and could not properly mature a diet of applesauce and crushed pears. Light years have interchanged for his years of living in darkness. The role of darkness is not to be seen as or equated with ignorance with the unknown and the mysteries of the unseen. Thus, in the name of Robeson, Godson, Hurston, Akhenaten, Hatshepsut, Blackfoot, Helen, Linen, Holly, the Three Marias, Tara, Lilith, Lord, Whitman, Baldwin, Ginsburg, Goldman, Lamosa, Gandhi, Gerard, Shabazz, Tadarka, Medusa, Guerrera, Yorka, Grant, Wright, Gallagher, Tucker, Ava, Holiday, Davis, Coltrane, Morrison, Johnson, Du Bois, Clark, Shakespeare, those who burn, those to the flame, and the countless unnamed. We claim the present as the present, as the hereafter. We are unraveling our navels that we may ingest the sun. We are not afraid of the darkness, we trust that the moon shall guide us. We are determining the future at this very moment. We know that the heart is the philosopher's stone. Our music is our alchemy. We stand as the manifested equivalent of 3 buckets of water and a handful of minerals. Thus realize that those very buckets turned upside down to line the percussive factor up forever. If you must count to keep the beat, then count. Find your mantra and awaken your subconscious. Carve your circles counterclockwise. Use your cipher to decipher. Coded language, man-made laws, climb waterfalls and trees for you with nature's lakes and rivers. Let your children name themselves and claim themselves as the new day. The today we are returning to be the champions of the champions. And the songs, painting, writing, dance, drama, photography, carpentry, crafts, love, and love. A real every instrument, acoustic, electronic, every so-called gender, race, every person as beings of sound, to acknowledge your responsibility to uplift the consciousness of the entire fucking world. We have gathered tonight under the guise of music to conduct a ceremony, to convene a meeting. Of the said and unsaid, the seen and unseen, the imagined and the necessary. A necessary imagined. Affirmation by Asada Shakur. I believe in living. I believe in the spectrum of beta days and gamma people I believe in sunshine, in windmills and waterfalls, tricycles and rocking chairs. And I believe that seeds grow into sprouts, and sprouts grow into trees. I believe in the magic of the hands. And in the wisdom of the eyes. I believe in rain and tears and in the blood of infinity. I believe in life. I have seen the death parade march through the torso of the earth, sculpting mud bodies in its path. I have seen the destruction of the daylight and seen bloodthirsty maggots prayed to and saluted. I have seen the kind become the blind, and the blind become the bind. In one easy lesson. I have walked on cut glass. I have eaten crow and blunder bread and breathed the stench of indifference. I have been locked by the lawless, handcuffed by the haters, gagged by the greedy. And if I know anything at all, it's that a wall is just a wall, and nothing more at all. It can be broken down. If I know anything at all, it's that a wall is just a wall. Nothing more at all. It can be broken down. Not far from here, a few hundred miles away from here, the first multinational corporation had representatives that arrived on the island of Manhattan. I think it's interesting that perhaps we talk a little bit about the first multinational corporation as we live in an illegitimate nation that is controlled by multinational corporations. The first multinational corporation was called the Dutch West India Trade Company. And when they arrived on the island of Manhattan, they were welcomed by the indigenous of the island of Manhattan. They were welcomed by the Lene Lenape. The Lene Lenape introduced them to the three sisters, the crops that were grown. They offered them food, shelter, communion. However, who were indeed representatives of this multinational corporation, they came from a culture that had taught that societies that do not practice the owning of private property, well, that those societies were labeled by them as uncivilized, as savage. Perhaps this was the corporation thinking. Others would argue that it was an idea born out of the Enlightenment. And it is true that their Enlightenment was supremacist. So after being welcomed by the Lene Lenape, the Dutch settlers on the island of Manhattan, who had their eyes on this beautiful island. In fact, you cannot imagine the flora and all of the different types of wildlife that lived there. They say that if the United States had been colonized from the West, and they arrived last, these European settlers at the island of Manhattan, that they would have made it a botanical garden. However, they did not arrive there last. And they decided that they would offer a modern day equivalent of about $25 to the Lene Lenape in exchange for the land, in their mind. The Lene Lenape received this dead currency as an offering in reciprocity of the many gifts and offerings that they had given these Dutch settlers in welcoming them. But these Dutch settlers had difficulty understanding how, after giving them this dead currency for this land, why the Lene Lenape, why the indigenous of this land did not leave the island, why they continued to live there, to hunt there, to fish there, and live amongst them. And so the Dutch settlers decided to build a wall. In the southernmost part of this island of Manhattan. It was a wall that was built to keep the indigenous out. A wall that was built to keep the Lene Lenape out. The Dutch settlers built a wall. It was 12 feet high. They built towers on the walls so that they could shoot at the Lene Lenape to get them to leave the island of Manhattan. Within the confines of this wall, the first thing that they created was a marketplace under the buttonwood trees. At this marketplace, other European settlers that arrived could purchase beaver pelts, goods, tools. They could buy or rent slaves. Which is an interesting thing to point out as we make connections tonight. For most people could not necessarily afford to own slaves, but they could afford to rent them. If they were building a house, working on a farm, they could rent them for a week or a weekend or a month. And so they would go to this market within the confines of this wall that the Dutch settlers built to rent slaves. Very similar to the way that Americans sometimes drive to the parking lots of depots and what have you and see workers standing there and hire them to work on their gardens or in their homes, to rent them for a day or two. Of course, those parking lots have now become empty, as there are slave catchers that are out. Anyway. The marketplace that they built within the walls that were built to keep the indigenous out, that marketplace still exists. The Dutch were eventually defeated by the British, and New Amsterdam became New York, and the New York Exchange became the New York Stock Exchange, still under those buttonwood trees, right within the confines of that wall that was built to keep the indigenous out. The wall no longer stands. The only thing that remains beyond that marketplace, that stock market, that New York Exchange, is a markation that tells you where the northernmost part of that wall was. It is called Wall Street. A wall that was built to keep the indigenous out. A wall that was built by enslaved Africans. This is the history of capitalism. It has always been racial. You cannot speak of capitalism if you are not speaking of racial capitalism. Assata Shakur said, a wall is just a wall, and nothing more at all. It can be broken down. The English poet John Keats said that poets are midwives of reality. Yet I have a sense that perhaps we are more like death doulas. Death doulas of empire. It is not essential that it die of natural causes. Of course, the natural endpoint of racial capitalism is fascism. We've been traveling this occupied country, these occupied lands, telling the story of that wall to remind us, those of us within the core of empire, of the connection between that wall and the wall that cuts across Palestine, which is called the Apartheid Wall. there are walls of demarcation between what they call the global north and the global majority. We are the global majority. Yet we are clear on the fact that the system that we live under is rooted in Black death and indigenous erasure. That it has always had, even when in blackface. Black death and indigenous erasure. To refer to this evening as a concert. Yet, having a dietary sustenance tradition versus health. Hacking the comfort compliance, hacking to the rebellious gene, hacking the doctrine, capitalism in relation to free labor and slavery, hacking to the history of the bank, is beating the odds of Iraq and joining the winning team, hacking the desperation and loneliness, the history of community in the marketplace, hacking the land rights and ownership, hacking the business law proprietorship, hacking to ambition and greed, hacking the forms of government, systems of control, the relation to suffering and sufferance, hacking the faith and morality, the treatment of one faith towards another, hacking the masculinity, femininity, sexuality, what is taught, what is felt, what is learned, what is shared, hacking the God, stories of creation, servants and eggs, hacking the nature, biodynamics, biodiversity, cycles and seasons, hacking the time, happiness, art, its relationship to doubt is a wire to fear, the notion of control, the space-time continuum, the force of gravity, whether the opposite of gravity is freedom. Hacking the freedom, power, responsibility, Bill of Rights, hacking the coincidence, the summer of 68, 2070 club, number of people with Facebook profiles, people who choose to share, people who share too much, people who seem lonely, people want to connect, people want to up them, people need up them, hacking the self-help, self-sufficiency, and self-indulgence, hacking the crazy, hacking the lunatic, hacking the star, hacking the infamous, notorious, the effects of the construct of poverty on the psyche, the effects of the construct of race, the victims that survived. There is a panel marked survival. 3 simple copper wires coiled around an orb, hacking the orbit, equatorial landlines used for the precious metals, potent as cotton. Potent as cotton. Hazardous, nuclear, cloud forms and fish farms, cow farts and pig shit, hacking the horse, industrial, digital, hacking the code. Use your instrument as metaphor, harness your craft, hack into the mainframe, dismantle definition, dogma and duty, hacking the destiny, hacking the dreams, subtext and subconscious, hacking the heart, cardio, combo, blood rich and oil, hacking the suffering and despair, hacking to the unfair advantage of those lucky enough to be born into one family or another, into one condition or another, hacking to the circumstantial evidence that proves the obvious and wakes the oblivious, hacking the birthright, bloodlines, royal and tainted, hacking the superstition, old wives' tales, the rituals of the shaman, hacking DNA, chemistry, the pharmaceutical industry, the modern day rape of the forest, hacking the recording servants, the modern day rape of the forest, the time it takes, the modern man will determine whether they eat your winner or foolish or not. Hacking to the database, the panel mark survival, hacking to celebrity, hacking to the cultural development of taste, hacking to violence, fear, and ignorance. How are they linked? How are they linked? What is the link between the rubber on the cars of your tire and the Congo? What is the link between the batteries and the oil in your vehicles and the plundering of Venezuela or West Asia, which they call the Middle East because to them London is the center. I can't start my day without coffee. Where does the coffee come from? I like a little sugar in my bowl. Why is Puerto Rico America? They point to France for democracy because they're afraid to tell you that that idea was born in Haiti. They speak of technology. They say that they plunder and extract for the sake of technology, which they deem is human progress. The earliest form of wireless communication was the drum. This is why they banned African drums on these occupied lands, because they realized that we were using them to communicate. The patterns on the drum is a form of programming. They speak of fossil fuels. We say, whose fossils? They would rather you think of dinosaurs and mammoths somehow melting thinking about the 10 million, over 10 million Congolese that were killed for the rubber for your tires. Then, now killed for the coltan, the cobalt, the gold, the diamonds, the copper, modes of dependency and extraction, reasons to destabilize a country. Follow the money, it's so simple. They steal the diamonds from South Africa, they steal the diamonds from Liberia, they steal the diamonds from Sierra Leone, they steal the diamonds from the Congo. They exchange diamonds with Israel. For weapons. This is how the apartheid system worked. When everybody was boycotting South Africa, South Africa provided Israel with diamonds in exchange for arms for the Afrikaners to use. Now, the diamonds, which are the #1 export of the country of Israel. They are African diamonds that are given to mercenaries in exchange for destabilization. Because destabilization in the Congo, destabilization in Venezuela, destabilization in Sierra Leone, destabilization cuts the cost. The point is, genocide is not technology. It is an age-old practice. The point is, we are the technology. How absurd to become fixated with artificial intelligence when there's nothing that surpasses intelligence. Capitalism is a form of artificial intelligence. Solely based on the idea of constant accumulation, the exploitation of the workers. Little African crystals in all of our smartphones, and think of those 10 billion buried in the Congo, an unrecognized genocide. I think of them, I think of their spirits, I think of the spirits of the martyrs, embedded in the soil, embedded in the soil, embedded in the crystals, embedded in the stones. I think of their spirits embedded in the soil and extracted for the sake of connecting us. How do we use that connection? How do we make sense of it? It does make sense. I mean, the word robot comes from the Slavic language. It means forced labor or slave. The word robot means forced labor or slave.
eventually sought human progress through genocide. Chattel slavery was an attempt to make us robots. To imagine us without any human relation, cut off from families, just machines or animals. That's what chattel slavery refers to. Chattel, cattle, the heads of cattle. You do not have the right to marry, you do not have the right to own property, you do not have the right to, you do not have the right to, you do not have the right to, you only have the right to work. I feed you just enough to survive, to be able to continue to work. The industrial era follows the colonial era. That's why if you ask any engineer to take apart a machine, whether that machine is a recording device, a camera, a vacuum cleaner, an air conditioner, a car, the engineer will tell you, well, that's the master, that's the slave. They learned from the plantations and applied it to the machines. We are the technology. It would be so simple to actually stop the machine, you know. It would just take, let's say, maybe 5 days of withholding our labor. There's a big march tomorrow, a march for nothing. It's called No Kings, it should be called No Capitalism. The party that those of us who say, oh, I'm not with the bad guys, I'm with the so-called good, that party is as subservient to capital and to the donors and the donor class as the other party. They will not save you. Those two parties are no different than that one party that was held on October 6th outside of a concentration camp in occupied Palestine. That's my thought on the party system. Everything that can be said about that occupied land over there is true of this nation right here. Every single thing. Including how propagandized the citizenry are. Black death and indigenous erasure. The only problem is we are neither dead nor erased. Indigenous sovereignty and black liberation. Land back and abolition. Abolition is the rebellious reimagining of what our schools, our penal codes, our laws, our ways of interacting with each other, the way in which we would operate as a community, as a society, mutual aid. Imagine. We have to be clear that this is a colonial land, that this is not an independent nation. This would only be an independent or sovereign nation, not because a bunch of expat Europeans arrived here and fought for the sake of freeing themselves from their fatherland. Not until the indigenous of this land free themselves from the European colonizers that arrived will this be a sovereign nation. Our duty is to co-conspire with them to crash that empire for the sake of indigenous sovereignty. That is land map. That is the ecological question. So why do we think it's impossible? What is the root of your defeatism, of your apathy, of your indifference, of your thinking, oh, it'll never happen, not in my lifetime? 5 days of withholding your labor and a list of demands. Carefully thought out demands. We have been touring this country telling this story of that wall, which Asada said is just a wall. And nothing more at all. It can be broken down, reminding all of the people of this land, or rather on it, that a wall is just a wall. A wall is just a wall. The indoctrination starts in the schools. You know you can tell your kids that they don't have to pledge the flag, right? That's what I did with my kids. Even if I had to send a letter to the teacher like, don't make my motherfucking kid pledge a flag. You don't believe in that shit. But the lessons that they teach, such as, did you know that over 100,000 enslaved Africans fought on the side of the British during the Revolutionary War? Only 5,000 to 8,000 enslaved Africans fought on the side of the so-called patriots or rebels. 5,000 to 8,000 versus over 100,000 that escaped their plantations to fight on the side of the British. Why? Because just 2 years before the Revolutionary War, there was a law that was passed. It was a case that was won by an enslaved African who had arrived on British soil and demanded his freedom. And he won the case. A case that said, in fact, they had no right to have slaves on British soil. The so-called patriots of this nation did not fight because they were upset about tax on motherfucking tea. They fought to maintain slavery and the profits of slavery. And they would have you fight with them by indoctrinating you by thinking that you should be fighting for this nation. Your job is to fight against it. Slowly it's becoming clear why we had to say this is a concert. It's true. It's true. They were fighting for the right to continue to profit from slavery. They were fighting for the right to maintain the practice of racial capitalism, i.e. capitalism. Dr. Ruth Gilmore Wilson, she defines racism as state-sanctioned group vulnerability to premature death. That is group individuated vulnerability to premature death. State sanctioned. That's Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore's definition of racism. I think of the birth rates and death rates of black mothers and indigenous mothers in this land. I think of the disparities between communities and wealth and, yes, indeed, the length of life. Of course, we should acknowledge in this moment that Brother Marshall beside me is 101 years old. As I said, we are neither dead nor erased. Tell you that this is impossible. I would tell you that it's not impossible to crumble an empire. It's not. I know many of you have fear, but what would happen to mine? Well, what would I do without? No, actually, you should be thinking the other way. Of what we would accomplish, of the schools we would develop, in the living indigenous languages of this land taught to all of our children as a first language. If we all knew the names of indigenous plants and trees, if we knew the very history of the land we are on, the redefinition of communities, of schools, of worship, understanding is that is why COINTEL brought their end about. Not because of their guns, but because they had set out to prove that it is possible for us to be able to provide affordable health care to all of our citizens. It is possible to be able to feed our children. All of this is possible. Even when the controlled opposition tells you to be patient. The controlled opposition, I'm referring to the Democratic Party. Nina Simone spoke of that in Mississippi, goddamn, saying they keep on saying go slow. But that's just the trouble. Socialism was not born in Europe. It's not a European invention. In fact, the European settlers considered the indigenous of this land savages and described them as communists because they had a practice of collectivism, and they could find a way to impose upon them the idea of selling land, which they said it was their responsibility to uphold. They called them communists. There's a lot of confusion that is sown in this country about what these words even mean. We're not supposed to know the definitions of these words. Capitalism is a system. It's a system. It is not an individual necessarily earning for their work. It's a system that is maintained by the exploitation of workers. Owning a store, providing for your community is not necessarily capitalism. Every morning there's one who holds his fire. His dilemma is my system of belief. They fire rounds, but I am seldom in their circle. A quiet mind is labeled sound and colored purple. My little boy has not yet learned to color with thin lines. His jumbled diction has not yet learned our contradiction. We speak of art with flaming passion. Then do work void of compassion. And bundle by reality is bleeding fiction. This is the life force I need you to have. Breathe through it.
so delighted to be here. Thank you all so much for being with us, and wow. Ooh. On the piano, keyboard, synthesizers, sound design, flute, kalimba, voice, energy, Surya Botafasina.
Yes.
Surya Botafasina. We're so delighted, like just beyond that our dear big brother would join us tonight. And thanks to Ronnie so much for the coordination, to Cornelia and the family. The one and only magnificent, the inspiration, Marshall Allen.
Marshall Allen. Alto saxophone, electronic valve instrument, keyboard, gong, sparkles, all the energy. Marshall Allen.
And this is Saul Williams. Saul Williams. On the drive here today, our dear brother Zach Pruitt is also our sound engineer and tour manager. On the drive here today, we're listening to some very special music that Surya was raised in California on the ashram of Swamini Turiya Sangeetananda. And Saul started singing along, and I was just like feeling all this energy. And we're gonna finish tonight with a piece. If you know it, join us. If you feel like clapping. But yeah, what do you call this, Surya? What is this? Does this have a specific name?
being on this planet. On this planet, we are grateful for your presence. Regardless of how many generations your family has been on this land, we have an obligation to the indigenous of this land. We are so grateful for your presence. Land back and abolition, indigenous sovereignty and black liberation. Those are the foundations on which we can build. Thank you all so much. Woo! Thank you once again to my brother Carlos Niño. For the infinite spirit, creative imagination, love pouring forth from this brother martial art. My brother love, brother Surya. Yes. Zach, the team, and her crew. Thank you all for being here. Much love to you all. Yeah.
It'll be fun.